Clippers and Wolves is the other game tonight, the 7-8 game out of the West. Wolves are the 7th seed, hosting the 8th seed Clippers, and Minnesota is laying 3, totals 230.5. The winner of this game will move on to play the Grizzlies, and the loser will play the winner of the Pelicans and Spurs game. Josh, we'll start with you in this game because you like the Wolves here. Tell me about it.
Yeah, pretty strongly opinionated towards the Wolves here, which will be fun. But look, I'm a Clippers believer to an extent. I'm a big Ty Lue fan, especially come playoff basketball. I'm a big Paul George fan, probably more so than most, I'd imagine, in terms of how highly I rate him at both ends of the floor. But ultimately, I still think they're being shown way too much respect in a position like this. And whether it's they're being shown too much respect or Minnesota isn't being shown enough, potentially a little bit of both. But the Timberwolves at home have been pretty consistent all season. I think they come out strong and aggressive here in front of their fans. If they do just that and their offense gets flowing early and they're able to play as front runners, which is what they do best, I'm not sure the Clippers will be able to turn it around in a one-off game situation. If this was a full series, then I'd be all over the Clippers in some way, shape, or form. But in a one-off game, Minnesota at home, I think there's too many advantages for that offense to take advantage of in the short term. And like I said, if the Clippers do find themselves playing from behind in this situation, we know that offensively they can be absolute rocks and diamonds. They rely on that three ball intensely. So does Minnesota, I guess, to an extent. So it could just come down to who gets the better variance from that point of view. But LA's offense from behind, like I said, is just so reliant on that three ball getting going. I'd like to think that Minnesota will at least scheme for that to some extent and shut that down. And if they do so, then I find it hard to see how the Clippers can stay in a contest where Minnesota should still be able to score pretty free willingly, even against a pretty solid and impressive Clippers defense, where I just think that there's enough mismatches for Minnesota to take advantage of there. I mean, the Clippers' hot streak, a lot has been made of it, and a lot of people pointing to that and how they turned the corner. I agree with it again to an extent. I think it's still a little bit, I don't want to call it fraudulent, but a little bit overblown. Just when you look at the teams that they've beaten, they beat up on the Thunder, they beat up on the Kings, they beat a Suns team that literally rested everyone. They had that big comeback against Utah, which basically every team in the league has come back against Utah in the second half of games. You look at the games where they played on the road, and aside from that win against Milwaukee, where again the Bucks quite literally sat everyone in that situation, they lost at Utah, they lost at Chicago. So you go back a little bit further as well, they lost at Denver. Those last 3 road games, none of them particularly look good. And you look at each one of those games individually, and it was the same thing. It was a slow start out of the gates. They had to try and play catch up. They just simply weren't able to get consistency from deep. And if that's the case again tonight, I think the Timberwolves shouldn't have too much trouble here getting the job done. So for me, Minnesota first quarter, I love them to come out aggressively and play from in front. I think there's a correlation ultimately between if you like Minnesota to cover full game or first half, you probably want to take first quarter because, like I said, this team has to essentially play as a front runner. I don't trust them playing from behind. If the Clippers are up, 6 to 8 points at halftime, I really don't like Minnesota's chances at all. So hopefully they do come out aggressive. They cover that first quarter line of -1, and then I will ride them all the way to the finish line on a -3 here.
6-8 points at halftime, because apparently that's not good for the Timberwolves. And Chris, that's pretty good for the Clippers and your bet tonight.
Yeah, well, I got to say, if you're going to attack the Timberwolves tonight, I do agree with Josh. I think one of the best ways to do that is right from the start of the game. I mean, the Timberwolves have exploded in the first quarter and the first half for most of the season, whereas the Clippers have been pretty slow starters, right? We've seen them come back in a lot of second half games. So, I mean, maybe that's an angle too. This game live, Clippers way down. Maybe they can fight their way back into this one. Listen, I think the Timberwolves are going to make the playoffs. I just don't think it's going to be tonight. I think the Clippers are going to win this game straight up, and I am more of a believer, evidently, in the Clippers than Josh is. Yes, they finished the season with a lot of momentum, right? That's a thing. Should have been 7 games in a row if it wasn't for that OT game against the Bulls, but 5 games in a row. It does It does a lot of good things for a team psychologically when that happens, right? They're gaining confidence, they're gaining chemistry. Paul George back in the rotation. Whereas Minnesota, not that they stumbled into the postseason, but they weren't always that sharp. Obviously, battling some injuries at the end there too. But I give the Clippers a lot of advantages in this matchup. We talk about the three-point shooting. I agree with Josh. It's going to come down to who's more effective from there. And few teams have been as effective as the Timberwolves this year from beyond the arc. But the Clippers have a better three-point percentage. And they have, I would argue, much better wing defense, right? They have some of the best wing defenders in the NBA. They can keep on throwing them at you one after the other. In this big game feel, this big pressurized situation for the Timberwolves, even though it's at home, they haven't been to the playoffs since 2018. This is a team with a lot of young players again, a lot of inexperience again. And you have a team like the Clippers with players like Reggie Jackson and Norman Powell and Paul George. A lot of these guys who have been there before, they've been deeply into the playoffs before. I don't think they're going to feel the nerves as much as the Timberwolves might. So I give them an experience edge. I give a slight edge in coaching to the Clippers too. I love Ty Lue. They're a very smart team. I think they're going to show some things that they probably didn't even show in the regular season. The Minnesota, if they get ahead quick in this one, they certainly have a chance. I mean, of course they have a chance to win this game. I think this line is sharp. But if you're giving me 3 points with the Clippers, I have to take it because of what I've seen. Also another part of that is Karl Anthony Towns. If he can take over this game down low, and if he can be really effective from the paint, and they can bounce that ball out to the three-pointer, that's going to be huge for the Timberwolves in this one. And they should have an advantage in the front court. Just not convinced that that's going to happen here. I think the Clippers are a little more buttoned up than people are giving them credit for. I actually have this game as even or -1 in favor of Minnesota because they're at home. So I have to take the points with the Clippers.
I down to mute myself. Josh, I'm sorry, but it's 2 against 1. Favor of the Clippers tonight. I'm also taking the Clippers with the points. I mean, LA, they've been playing really well. Effective field goal rate is ranked 3rd right now, which means they're knocking down shots, and that means less transition opportunities for Minnesota. And if you get Minnesota out of their transition game and make them play in the half court, that's where they really struggle. So if the Clippers are able to effectively score on offense and get back and have their defense set, the Minnesota relies heavily on just spot-up shooting, and I think the Clippers have the players to defend that. Talk about the three-point line and how that's going to come into play tonight. The Wolves allow the 7th highest three-point attempts per game. And yes, Luke Kennard is out tonight, but I wouldn't say he's necessarily someone who's going to move the needle too much. A very good three-point shooter, but you got Paul George, you got Reggie Jackson, who's shooting about 45% against the Wolves from 3 this year. So I am banking on them knocking down some shots from deep and limiting Minnesota's transition play, which is what their offense relies very heavily on. So I'm going to take the Clippers as well. It's going to be a battle tonight. Kate and Chris versus Josh.
That's a really good stat about Reggie Jackson too, Kate, because I wasn't aware of that, and Reggie Jackson has really struggled this year, three-point shooting. He should probably just stop shooting altogether, and the Clippers, the percentages would go way up. But to know that he's shooting that well against the Timberwolves, that's interesting.
So his three-point prop, if you want to take it, is at plus 135, 134, or over 2.5 threes, and he's hit at least 3 in 3 of the 4 games. So something to keep an eye on there.
Since it's 2 against 1, I feel like Josh might have a rebuttal. Josh, you got.
Yeah, go
I just want to give you the floor, Josh.
Look, I don't disagree with basically what both of you are saying in terms of, firstly, the importance, I think, of a team like the Clippers finding momentum going into the playoffs, and then secondly, around the fact that the Timberwolves defensively, especially when it comes to their perimeter defense, can be a little bit frail at times. But again, for me, it's just largely about a one-game scenario. If this was a series bet in any way, shape, or form, I would be all over the Clippers. I just don't know how much they can show and adjust in-game in a specific matchup like this, where the Timberwolves, like we already know, offensively are going to come out pretty aggressive, pushing the tempo, and hopefully / potentially play as front runners in this game, in which case, again, it changes the game script entirely. And if they do play as front runners and the Clippers do become too dependent on that three ball, which we have seen at times a lot from them this season, then I think it becomes a little bit difficult for them to have to keep pace in this environment. So again, it's largely just based around the fact that I think that the Clippers win streak is being a little bit overblown based on the quality of opposition that they've had and the fact that all of those wins basically came at home. You look at their road splits and they haven't been impressive. So I need to still go off of what we have seen from LA on the road. And again, in an environment like this, I think everything for me screams Timberwolves playing from in front, in which case that's a very large part of why I think that they can get the job done here.
Argument in terms of favoring the Wolves. Their head coach, Chris Finch, just signed a new 4-year contract. The players really wanted him back. That's exciting news for them. And their first opportunity to go to the postseason, yes, they went to the playoffs in 2018, but prior to that, it was, 2004? So this is a very big deal to be hosting this game for Minnesota and their fan base. So, I mean, geez, am I talking myself out of the Clippers here? That's not good. No, I still like the Clippers, but you have a very good case for the Timberwolves as well. I mean, this game could ultimately go either way, as any of these games could.
Well, and
yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say, Josh, I don't think it would be a bad hedge either. Take the Timberwolves early, take the Clippers late, and you can do that live too. I mean, if the Timberwolves come out on fire, that is going to be tough for the Clippers to hang with them, especially for the first half. Maybe they make some adjustments at the second half, but that's not a bad hedge if anybody wants to approach it that way.
I think as well, just quickly, if you want alternatives in terms of how to attack this game, and if you like the Clippers, I'd be looking at maybe sprinkling something on an old spread for them, maybe a -3 for the Clippers, even up to like a -5.5 for the Clippers at some really good plus money, because essentially, if they're in and around that number, they're going to win outright. And I think that there's a very realistic chance that if they're ahead in the fourth quarter, they could blow Minnesota out the ballpark in sort of the final 4 or 5 minutes of this game if Minnesota is sort of giving up essentially and already turning their attention to the next game and trying to get in via that 9-10 winner scenario. So yeah, I think the Clippers alt line may be a really good line to attack it as well if you do lean LA.
All right, well, Chris and I both leaning LA, taking Clippers +3, and Josh is playing the Wolves -1 in the first quarter and the game -3.